Okay, everybody. So here you see a assorted little lineup of valves here, including this one. This would be pretty much like a run through of every single valve, which valve is good for you, because there's obviously 4 different ones to choose from. 5th one, which I don't have, is the Horn Blasters version of what would be the Grahm White. So what we have here is the first Grahm White that everybody gravitates to. It's great. Only thing you have to worry about is it getting stuck. The later ones seem to have a little deal where you can't really see it that well, but it's going to be hard to do, but just bear with me here. That little button, you push it all the way in, just envision that. It'll slowly come back out. And the newer ones just don't have that rigidity with the springs, blah, blah, blah. You know, as the course of years go on and such, things like that, you'll kind of realize that the quality isn't the best. Well, with that being said, here is a older Grahm White, same part number, same everything pretty much. This one came out of a BN SD40-2. This one's much better. Push that button in, comes right back out. You can tell this one, I think this one may have actually gotten redone, rebuilt, or something like that, so maybe there's a lesser of the 2 evil springs in there. You can also tell that between the new one and the old one, look at the flare on each valve there. You can see flare is much wider than this one. So they definitely changed the casting sometime between, I'd probably want to guess between the 80s and the early 2000s. That's when people were changing things all the time. And between the two, obviously the older one, you can actually quill a lot with a Grahm White. And that being said, with your AW195, you pretty much get the same quill edge as you would get on either of those two. This one, yes, it's just that you have more of a likelihood of this one getting stuck all the way open and needing to have a safety valve in place. It's good to have either way. It can happen to any valve, but more so on the newer ones than per se the old ones. As you can see, this one was outfitted with press paper suckers. That way when I'd hit a bump, when it used to be up here, it wouldn't jiggle around and be annoying and things like that. Onto the Viloco equipment, from Grahm White to Viloco. This 2-stage, absolutely phenomenal for 2-stage quilling. If you don't care about individually quilling 1, 2, or 3 bells in, this is the valve for you. If you want absolute frickin' precision, this is what you want right here. Single stage AW206. This one was professionally restored, and it's even got a really nice part number on the valve, which you don't really see that too often. And even between the Grahm White and the Viloco, you can see that you still got that. You got a really nice flare on this one. They still kept the flare on this one here, but then as obviously time went along, you got the smaller flare for saving money and blah blah blah. You can also tell that it's almost kind of got like a little gooseneck here. It's really long. This one, on the other hand, is a little bit shorter. It actually looks more more beefy on this one than actually, say, the 206, but it actually is way more beefy on the 206. See how thick that is? And I suppose now you got the two. Now see this here, this is a 2-stage. You see how there's kind of a button right there. That's your first stage right there. And then when you actually pull the valve, you see where from the paint to the actual brass color in there, that's your second stage. It's really interesting. It's kind of hard to do with one hand because it's not connected to anything, but that right there is your first stage. That'll engage your first stage, such as this. This is actually more refined than this, like an honest, constructive feedback wise. You can tell there, it just looks like it looks like a single stage. Because on this single stage here, now you can actually see you have your 2-stage 195. You got a button, and then the actual, that brass part, that'll actually go all the way in. Here's your single stage. That is just a thick button. That is just one singular stage throughout. So if you want to say, you know, you have a K5 whatever, K5L, K5HL, K5 anything, M5, M something, anything that you would like to quill for your pleasure, you can quite literally just get right in there, and you can see how minuscule of a, you have range within that. Now, some people might like that and some people might hate that. If you want to choose a valve, you quite honestly have to try it, because until you actually do it, then you'll actually know. 2-stage, I'd say, is more like an Amtrak P42 DC, where you have a literal plastic button where it's singled off into different stages, and it's pretty much this valve here. So when you engage that first valve, or that first stage, it'll push you right into it. You're not going to, as hard as you try, you will not be able to really get individual bell quilling with this valve. Because once you crack it open, that 135 pounds, 125, 150 even in some cases, that'll just push that valve right open. You're not going to be able to, you might be able to kind of push it open, engage, and then go back, but it's much harder to actually get a good quill off of this. If you like the halfway quill, this is it right here. This is totally the move. If you want individual bell quilling, this is it right here. Because once you crack it open, it kind of pushes a little bit, because you have that with every single valve. The literal pressure that you have in all of your tanks, when you kind of bust it open, it's going to push just a little bit, but then you can actually come back down and then get that 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. And this one is more of the precision, like, you know, I have to get the number 1 bell or this bell or that bell. If you're just going for just a quill where you can get 3 bells going at the same time, 195, best shot. There's a lot more of these floating around too. They're a lot easier to get than the 206s. The 206s, especially this one, you can tell was made out of complete brass, yellow bronze, the whole deal. It's a lot older, a lot more rare, and you can also tell that 206 has mounting holes versus the 195, where it's just kind of hanging there on 2 pipes and there's no mounting holes. But if you actually had to or wanted to, there are very rare cases where railroad shops took this brass nut out here and replaced it with a working single stage or a working two stage. So there will be cases where you find a two stage that has this body, or vice versa, a single stage body such as this with a two stage quite literal valve assembly in there. So here's the full view of, this is a AW206, much older model. Here's a AW195 right, two-stage model. You can really clearly see that button in there for the first stage. And then obviously your second stage, which is that brass part that has no paint on it. That'll get pushed in. This came out of a CN FE, you know, you got two valves, blah, 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 A200 or M3H. This one I'm unsure of. This was restored by somebody at some point. No idea what the heritage is on that. But then this one, yes, this one came out of a Burlington Northern SD40-2. And again, you can tell that it's much older. More metal, different casting. This one actually has a painted part number over the actual. I'd assume that this one would probably have the same, or had the same thing, but it got restored and painted over at some point. But if you are looking for a valve and you're figuring out which valve to decide on, here are your options. And believe me, it's actually a lot harder than you think, because once you, again, actually try it for yourself, you'll know what valve you like the most. For the most part, some people can envision it and go, okay, I want the two stage because, you know, you can just kind of get pushed into the first stage and you got your 3.5, 2.5 bells that make the perfect quill sound. Then again, if you want the precision, you know, okay, 1 bell, 2 bell, blah, 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 this will be the one for you to look for. Grahm white. This is technically your two stage of Viloco equipment. And they're much more easy to find and way less expensive than if you were to come across a 195 or a 206. But between all of them, I'd have to say that out of the 195 and this older Grahm white here, you'd want to go with this older Grahm white here. Sometimes this can be a little more tough to quill with in between the two stages. This you can quill very well between the two stages between this setup here. If you want the just standard run of the mill, you're just looking for a valve to have, whatever, find a Grahm white, even if it's got the small flare, anything like that. Just, you know, be mindful that it could get stuck open and you want a safety valve on the bottom of that, due to the newer nature of, you push that little button in there. Kind of, again, very reminiscent of the single stage, but Grahm white was able to figure that in to make it a two-stage valve rather than a single stage valve. You can see that is there's your true difference. So if there's anybody out there, like, even when I first got into it, I'm like, single stage, first stage, blah blah, whatever, just show me what's going on here. Here's the most obvious way I can put it here. You got one stage, and then farther back, two stage valve. One singular button right here. Singular, 1 1/9 stage. You can see this one is, yeah, this one's been put through the ringer, but it has been redone. It's even got the just straight metal. It doesn't have a rubber thing on there. If you take that rubber off of this, it's just like a little post. It's probably the size of my pinky, honestly. Take that off, it won't look like that. But there are some of these that actually have a rubber shoe around the Viloco valves, and mostly for engineer comfort. You're not grabbing a piece of metal, but it's honestly, it's pretty smooth. It's not bad. You can put your thumb right in there, right against that flare, and then when you're, you know, ready to get a horn really tuned in per se. That's how you go. That's why this one was really desirable, especially depending on what setup you have, because you can go like this if you have it down here, which it was at one point. You can tell the bell valve used to be there, or even on this side, because you're going to be doing it like this. Like this, you would have to almost have it higher up or down, but even then, the most comfortable way, you'd be like this. You still could do it like that, but it's still a dependency on, just say you're driving along and this and that, and you're, you know, a little more shaky than normal. Obviously, anybody is driving around with a train horn. It's not the most legal thing, but it's a hobby nonetheless, and you just got to be smart about it, and just obvious things. But yeah, and for this especially, I think the biggest drawback with actually, at one point, well, the last video I had, this setup was taking off this one. Like, you took this bolt out, this slides off. Key note, if you're disassembling one of these, this bolt has to come all the way out for this to pop off. You can't just loosen this and it'll pop off. So you see that outer ring right there, it's kind of bored in more, or it's carved out more, so that bolt fits into there. So if you just loosen that, it'll rotate, but you actually have to put the bolt, you have to take the bolt out, and then this will actually pop out of there. And that used to be up here, because that was kind of an experiment. Thought it would be a lot better just pulling it like this, but the realization is actually that you're pulling like this on a single stage valve. Your hand isn't here, your hand's down here, or even right here. That rope in between that, every bump you hit, that's flexible. So every time you hit a bump, you might have, say you got one bell going on your K5L, K5H, LLA, whatever you have. The second you hit a bump, it's either going to turn off or turn it on, because there's nothing in between. Your hand's not here. You could put your hand here, but you don't actually have a significant amount of leverage per se when you're doing it like this. Here it's really short, and then your finger's right here, and there's not really much to do. And then naturally you're like, okay, I got a rope, I'm going to do it from the rope. So every time that goes down and there's a bump, then you're going to get like 3-4 bells, no bells, other bells. You're going to be trying to quill, and then this here, you actually have, you know, your hand here, and you can apply sort of back pressure, you know, compensating for the bumps that you hit, because you can hear it as you're going such and such. It's just, you know, kind of autistic thoughts. Really a deep dive here on valves. And if you really care about your valves, this is pretty much the video for you. As you can see, every explanation, actually thoroughly going through them. Yeah, it's just it's fascinating and interesting how they did that, or they came up with that later on. They actually quite literally have, and I don't want to take it apart because it's, you know, it's functioning correctly and everything like that. This one got rebuilt. Had to put new gaskets and things like that in there. But this button is connected to a separate stem that goes through the first stage stem, and it's really bizarre because compared to this, you're pretty much looking at a single stage valve, but they made it to where in here Grahm pretty much took the single stage development and the two-stage development, put it together, but then all in all it's a two-stage valve, which is really, again, it's kind of bizarre. They took two, put it together, and I don't know, I just like this better. It's just thick and beefy and serviceable. Not that Grahm aren't, but you know, you got freaking German Allen heads on this when all you need for this, you just need a big vise and a giant wrench. That's it. That's all you need. It comes apart, a couple gaskets, way less gaskets. In this one there, I believe there's only 2 or 3, and then you got like maybe 4 or 5 in this one. But then again, Grahm you have, I think there's only like 1, there's like maybe 2 or so. But yeah, you're looking for a valve. These are distinguished differences between your newer Grahm your older Grahm your even older Grandpa, which is the single stage or the 2-stage here, and you have the great Grandpa right here, which is your single stage. Yeah, even then, this one I've autistically, per se, whatever you want to call it, spectrum disorder. There's blue tape in there. So if you're driving around, it'll go ting, 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 ting. And that's very annoying when you're driving around. But if you put some tape in there, and that's an O-ring in there, make it real nice and tight, nice and taut, but just enough to where you can lightly, you know, or somewhat lightly. So every time you hit a bump, it'll, but with that tape in there, it's actually really taut. This one used to be like, this assembly on the single stage, it was like tap, 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 tap. This one's actually got a spring in there to keep it taut back, so that way there's no juggling around. And same with the Grahm that one's got, there's a retention spring beneath that that's secured in there, and there's even a little hole for it. So yeah, there'll be back pressure going this way, kind of keeping it held against that way it's not like tat 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 tat. This one, the spring is gone, so you can kind of, yeah, you won't want that when you're driving around right next to your right ear while you're trying to focus. Not nice at all, but here we go. Here's your absolute 1, 2, 3, 4 differences, and then the horn blaster is pretty much the same as that one, so technically number 5. So there you are. Hope you enjoyed, and happy valve hunting, testing, and further all using. There you go. Have fun.